Oxalate can cause joint pain, muscle and tendon pain, gut issues, brain issues. It binds minerals like calcium and magnesium, making them unavailable in our bodies and causing nutritional deficiencies, and it can even cause cancer. So let's talk about oxalate and oxalate dumping. Hi there, my name is Sue. If you haven't been here before, I have been eating a carnivore diet now for about 3 years, and I have had some pretty wild and full-on oxalate dumping experiences throughout these 3 years. And today I'm going to talk about oxalate dumping, ways to manage it, and explain what oxalate is and what it does in your body. So what is oxalate and where does it come from? Most of the oxalate that people have stored up in their bodies has come from their diet. Oxalate can be really high in some plant foods, a lot of plant foods that are generally considered to be really healthy. So these are things like spinach and chard and beets and beet greens, almonds, cacao, peanuts and cashews. It's also really high in buckwheat and soy and chia seeds. Some of the berries like raspberries and blackberries, super high in rhubarb and black tea. And consuming more than about 100 milligrams of oxalate a day is likely to be stored in your body. So how much is 100 milligrams? It's a bit hard to visualize, isn't it? I can tell you that 1 cup of raw spinach is likely to contain between 700 and 900 milligrams of oxalate all on its own. So if we're eating a really healthy plant-based diet like I was before I came to carnivore, where we're doing some green smoothies and lots of spinach salads and things like that, we can be consuming massive amounts of oxalate. Now, the reason that our bodies store oxalate is because it is a poison. It is highly acidic and it is poisonous to us. And so if the levels get too high in our blood, it can kill us. There are people who have been hospitalized and people who have died from oxalate poisoning. This is the reason that rhubarb leaves are poisonous, for example, is because they contain huge amounts of oxalate. So if you think, for example, like myself in the past, I might have buckwheat porridge for breakfast because I was, off the gluten. And so I'd have buckwheat porridge and I might put a little bit of cinnamon on there, which is really high in oxalate. And then I'd have often some raspberries and then I might have some almond milk on that as well. And so I've got a whole mixture of very high oxalate containing foods there for breakfast. And then for lunch, I might have a green smoothie. And so I would often put in half a bag of spinach into the blender, and I might throw in a banana, I might throw in some avocado. If avocado is underripe, it can be really high in oxalate. I might put in some almond butter or some cashews and some chia seeds, and I might throw in some raspberries and some cacao. And so once again, I have an absolute massive amount of oxalates in that green smoothie. It could be 1,500 to 2,000 milligrams of oxalate just in that green smoothie. And then for dinner, some sweet potato or ordinary potatoes, quite often used to have wedges and things like that. And so then there's a whole bunch more oxalate there. So in a day, somebody like myself who was on a very highly plant-based diet could be eating 2, 3, 4, even 5,000 milligrams of oxalate a day. And so what our body does, because it has no other way to get rid of that quickly, is it takes the oxalate and it stores it in the tissues of our body, and it can store it anywhere. It can store it in our muscles or our tendons, it can store it in our eyes, it can store it in our brain. And so oxalate can be in the form of crystals, and it can cause irritation and inflammation in the tissues and in the muscles and tendons, and is probably a very common cause of a lot of the muscle pain and things that people experience, and arthritis that people get diagnosed with as they get older when they've got joint pain, and that it's quite possibly a lot of the time oxalate is at least part of the problem, I would say. So diet is a huge source of oxalate, or can be. Even those people eating a fairly junk food diet, ultra processed, whatever, are still getting their fair share of oxalate. If they drink black tea, they're going to be getting oxalate in that. If they are eating fries, they're going to be getting oxalate in the fries. If they are eating chocolate, they're going to be getting oxalate in the chocolate. So still, they don't get off too lightly, but I think that those of us who have gone down the path of the whole vegan, vegetarian, superfood smoothie kind of things and juices, I think that we have really done ourselves a disservice with the amount of oxalate that we've been putting into our bodies. Now, the next place that oxalate can come from is if you have been exposed to mold. So this was also me as well in the last 10 years. I worked in a very moldy building with my business for 4.5 years, and it made me really sick. I didn't realize that mold could make its own oxalate, and it does in our body. So molds can actually create oxalate in your body as well. And so it becomes a bit of a vicious cycle, especially for someone like myself who's on a highly plant-based diet and being affected by mold. You've got the oxalates in the diet causing gut issues, and then the mold is creating more oxalate, which is causing more inflammation and having an impact on your immunity and just making this big mess. And it's just this very vicious downward cycle that can really, really impact health. So mold and oxalate can be very connected and definitely do influence each other, and they can make you very, very sick. So now let's talk about oxalate dumping. What is oxalate dumping and why does it happen? When we start on a carnivore diet, if we dive straight in, like I did, we are basically cutting out all oxalate from our diet. Now you would think that would be a good thing, and overall it probably is, but it can really give your body a hard time. So what happens is once your body eventually realizes that there's no oxalate coming in, that there's no oxalate in your blood, it kind of goes, oh, let's pull some oxalate out of the tissues and get rid of it. Let's dump it. Let's get rid of some of this poison. And so it starts pulling it out of the tissues. Now, this oxalate dumping process can cause all sorts of pain and inflammation. It can cause muscle pain and tendon pain. It can cause anxiety and depression and, kind of neurological issues, which are all things that oxalate can cause generally, but it comes back in waves almost with the oxalate dumping, because your body will dump it for a little while and then it might stop or slow right down and then it'll start dumping it again. Is generally how it happens, although for me in the beginning it seemed like it was just constantly dumping. But it will pull the oxalate out of the tissues, which of course is acidic, so it's causing inflammation in your body, making things sore and just making you feel bad. And then it will dump it in one of various ways. Sometimes it'll push it out through the kidneys and the bladder, through the urine, and it can cause bladder irritation, a bit like a bladder infection, I guess, where you're wanting to go to the toilet all the time because you've got this acidic little crystals and things that are irritating things. Now, I forgot to mention that most kidney stones are made from oxalate and calcium, so they are calcium oxalate kidney stones, and these are the common form, and these are caused by this stuff. So that's always a potential for anyone who's oxalate dumping, if they're prone to kidney stones, is that they may end up with some kidney stones. Your body may dump it through your bowel, which is where my body has dumped most of my oxalate, and so that will cause diarrhea. It'll be sandy and hot, like burning diarrhea, because it's acidic, and it feels a bit like when you've eaten really hot curry or something. And so diarrhea is fairly common. It can push crystals out through the skin. Sometimes it'll leave marks, sometimes it won't. And some people get oxalate crystals coming out through their eyes. So you get little bits of gritty, sandy stuff that can really irritate and sting. Sometimes it'll cause a real burning feeling on your eyes. I've had that over the last 3 years a couple of times. Sometimes they look like crystals, and sometimes they just look like little bits of sand when they come out through your skin. What I have found, especially probably over the last 12 months or so, 18 months, particularly the last 12 months, is that my oxalate dumping is now definitely comes in waves. And so, as I said originally, it felt like it was just constant, and there was no way that I could really make it slow down. But now, what I find, and Sally Norton has talked about this, if you don't know who Sally Norton is, she's kind of the queen of oxalates. Her book is really worth reading if this is a subject you want to know more about. I'll link to her book below the video. She talks about how she'll have a day or two where she just starts feeling really good, and then she knows that she's going to go oxalate dumping, and it starts the next day kind of thing. And that's what happens with me now too. I have days where I just feel amazing. I'm starting to recognize it, and it's like, oh no, because I feel just so good. And then next thing, down into oxalate dumping and feeling miserable, anxious, depressed, sore, diarrhea, just depending on what's all happening and where it's going. So that's kind of the way that it works. Apart from that, oxalate dumping can cause obviously skin issues, skin rashes, itching, that sort of thing, headaches, just all sorts of wonderful symptoms. And so that brings me on to my next topic, which is histamine. So histamine and oxalate are also connected. Histamine intolerance is also a common subject within the carnivore community because a lot of people have problems with it. And this is something that I've also had all sorts of problems with, and I still am having histamine intolerance issues. And part of the reason is because oxalate causes histamine problems. Histamine will rise when there's inflammation in the body, especially the gut, and oxalate dumping will often cause inflammation, especially in the gut. There are histamine receptors in every system of our body, and so histamine intolerance symptoms can vary widely, and they vary from gut issues to mental health to period pain, body pain, seasonal allergies, and anaphylaxis. Some of these symptoms obviously cross over with common oxalate dumping symptoms because they're affecting each other and they're very much intertwined if you have them both going on in your body. So histamine and oxalate are often connected and affect each other. Throw in some mold and you've got a really confusing, messed up bunch of symptoms and a very sick body usually. And that was where I was 3 years ago. Hopefully that's not you. But histamine intolerance and oxalate dumping are really common on the carnivore diet. So let's have a look at ways of managing it. So the best way initially, if you're thinking about trying carnivore and you actually haven't started, is to just go into it slowly. Learn which foods are high in oxalate that you eat and then work out which ones are the highest and gradually take those out of your diet. And just gradually reduce the amount of oxalate that you're intaking each day, and then your body will start to naturally eliminate some of it, but not in a big hurry, not like what happens if you actually stop eating all oxalate. The problem with diving right in like I did, I now realise that I've been quite lucky that I didn't have more problems with my body than I actually did, because the oxalate dumping can put a lot of stress on your body, put a lot of stress on your kidneys and on your gut and everything else. And so if you are someone like me who's eaten loads of oxalate, who's had issues with mold and things like that, then you're probably better to go a bit slower and give your body an easier time, because in the long run you'll probably get there faster, that's what I'm trying to say, than if you do what I did and jump in and have all of these problems and this massive amount of oxalate dumping going on for a very long time. It's probably taken longer for my health to recover than it would have if I'd done it slowly. But in saying that, if you are also like me and can't do things slowly and you've got to do all or nothing, then do the all or nothing and just be prepared. But if you can go slow, then do that. Just work out your highest oxalate food. So if you eat almonds or almond butter every day, just take that out. If you're having spinach every day, just take that out, but leave some other oxalate foods in there and just gradually reduce them until you get to the point where you can go onto your carnivore diet and take out the rest of the oxalate, hopefully without too many issues. Now, I also want to say here as well that some people can go onto carnivore and have no oxalate dumping for maybe 3 years or 5 years, and then all of a sudden their bodies start. And I feel for them because they have had an easy ride initially, and then all of a sudden it confuses them because they don't know what's going on. And then they eventually realise that they're oxalate dumping. And I don't know why their bodies just take so long to get round to getting rid of it, but that's just, we're all different. And so I guess that's just the way things work. Now, if you're already on a carnivore diet and you are suffering with oxalate dumping, then a few little tips that can help to reduce that a little bit, just depending on how much is going on. As I said in the beginning, for me, there wasn't a whole lot that actually made a huge amount of difference. But if you are having oxalate dumping issues, adding back a little bit of oxalate into your diet can help. Now, the reason for this is because it keeps a little bit of oxalate in your bloodstream, and so your body sees that, and so it's not going to pull as much out of the tissues. Now, some people tend to freak out a bit about this, and they're like, oh, I'm not eating anything with oxalate because I don't want that stuff in my body. But if you're keeping your oxalate intake under, say, 50 milligrams a day, your body's not going to store that. It'll just pass through. But it's enough to just signal to your body that there's still some oxalate coming in, and so it's less likely to be pulling heaps. And it'll take longer potentially for your body to get rid of all the oxalate, but that's not a problem. It's just if you've got lots of oxalate in your body, it's going to take a long time anyway. And so if you can suffer less and put your body through less trauma, because that is what this is, because you're pulling so much out, it's making everything acidic and just causing all this inflammation and all this horrible acidity in your body, then if you can reduce that, then that's obviously going to be a good thing. So what can you add back in to give yourself a little bit of oxalate? You can have a cup of black tea, maybe a handful of almonds or some dark chocolate. Some people do that. Dark chocolate every day can help. I currently am taking slippery elm powder. I found that helps for me personally because it's good for soothing the gut as well, but it has some oxalate in it. Electrolytes also help, so electrolytes and minerals. Sally Norton recommends magnesium citrate, calcium citrate and potassium citrate. Also salt can help, so if you've got a good quality salt with its minerals in it, that can help. I personally find that consuming dairy helps, and I think that that's the calcium that does that. When I first started drinking raw milk, I had been buying raw milk and making kefir with it, and then I saw a video talking about how raw milk can help to heal your gut. So I decided I was going to drink it every day. And so when I first started drinking it, I got to about 3 days in. I was having about a glass a day. And I got to about the third day, and then I had this kind of mass exodus of oxalate crystals out of my breasts. And that was when I actually started looking into whether oxalate can cause cancer. And yeah, there's some research out there that shows that it certainly can. I actually have a video where I spoke about this as well, because it just seemed absolutely nuts. But these little crystals that looked like crystals came out of my breasts en masse, and it lasted about 2 or 3 days. The most were in the first day, and they didn't leave any marks on my skin. So I'm assuming they came out through the pores in my skin. I don't know, but they were real, and some of them were probably 2 millimeters long, quite big crystals. I actually have some in a container still, so if anybody anytime ever wants to get them tested, they're most welcome to do so. But that is something real that happened to me, and I still get them coming out every now and then. So that was the reason for me looking into whether there was research on oxalate causing breast cancer, and bingo, there sure was. So I assumed that consuming the raw dairy and having that extra calcium is what actually triggered that release. And so I have found, because I've been off and on dairy over the 3 years, I'm off it again at the moment because I think that it stops me from losing weight. But I do feel that my oxalate dumping is less severe if I'm having dairy, and definitely the raw milk seemed to actually trigger that huge release, which was an easy release. It wasn't like it going through my bowel and causing diarrhea. This was just, it came out through my skin in an easy way, which was much preferable, even though it was kind of weird. Now, the other thing that I've been testing, I'm experimenting with at the moment, is chlorella. So I had been taking chlorella a while back for, I don't know, maybe 3 months for the mold, and I was taking it and then I stopped, and then I had been thinking about starting it again, and I had a comment from a viewer, I think on one of my videos, who said that they had found that chlorella helped with oxalate dumping. Now I've had a look and there's no research on this, but chlorella does bind heavy metals and things, and I don't know whether it may bind oxalate. So I'm back on it again at the moment, just experimenting to see whether it makes any difference. It does make a difference to the way I feel. I feel good when I'm taking it, and so I think that my body needs it, whether it's just to do with the mold or whether it's to do with the oxalate as well, I don't know. So chlorella could be something that might be worth trying if you're suffering with oxalate dumping. I'd be interested to know if it does help you, because I suspect that it does with me. So that's basically my talk today about oxalate and oxalate dumping and ways of managing it. As I said, I'll pop the link to Sally Norton's book underneath the video and anything else that I think that might be of assistance or relevant. So if you have any questions or comments, pop those below and I'll get to them as soon as I can. If you like this video, make sure to subscribe, like and share with anyone you think might be interested. I thank you very much for watching, and I will talk to you again another day. Goodbye for now.